When they started flogging him, I wasn't sure if he would survive it. The men from the village didn't hold back. Emeka stood there, silent at first, as the sticks came down on his back. Then he screamed a sound that echoed through the compound. His sisters were wailing in the background, but nobody dared to stop the elders. They had made up their minds, and in our village, once the elders decide, it is final. Emeka wasn't always like this. When he was young, everyone loved him. He was the brightest boy in the village, and because of his father's good name. The men and women at the village meeting agreed to contribute money to send him to university. He'll be our pride, they said. A doctor from our village. Every market day, people brought what they could, money, yams, palm oil, to help with his school fees. Even the poorest widows gave something. They believed in him that much. And Emeka didn't disappoint at first. He passed his exams, graduated, and became a doctor. But then something changed. When he came back from studying his doctorate degree in medicine, he stopped coming to the village. He was the kind of man who didn't have kind words for anyone who came from our village. Emeka had long cut himself off from the village. Village people are wicked, he would say whenever someone tried to talk to him about visiting or involving himself in family matters. I don't want village people. I heard the stories, just like everyone else. At first, people thought he was busy, but then he started refusing invitations. He didn't come home when his uncle died. He didn't come home to inform his kinsmen when he was ready to marry, either. Instead, he hired strangers from a bricklayer station to stand in as his kinsman during his traditional wedding. His people didn't even know he had gotten married until months later. I have no business in that village, he would say. When I make money, I build a house in the city. Houses in the village are a waste of money. Why tie myself to a place I don't need? When his first sister got married, he didn't attend. He sent money and told the family to put the traditional wedding on Zoom so he could watch from his home in the city. The elders were furious, but they let it go. Then his second sister got married, and he did the same thing. He didn't come, just sent money and watched on Zoom. This time, his parents were heartbroken. Why won't you come home? His mother asked him. But Emeka just said, I don't see the need. I'm busy. His parents' house in the village was falling apart. The roof leaked, the walls were cracking, and the floor was turning to mud. His father begged him. Emeka, please come and fix the house for us. We are too old to live like this. But Emeka refused. Why should I waste money on a house in the village, he said. You can come and stay with me in the city if it's so bad. His father didn't argue, but I could see the pain in his eyes. He told his father often, stay with me in town, stop going to the village. They'll kill you there. It hurt his parents deeply, but they never argued much. They just shook their heads and accepted it. When his parents fell sick, they were brought to his hospital in the city. Everyone thought that since Emeka was their son, they would receive the best care. But they died within weeks of each other. Some said it was their time, others whispered that their hearts broke from neglect. When it came time to bury them, Emeka refused to follow tradition. But death has a way of forcing people to do what they don't want to. His parents' death was something no one could explain. He wanted to bury them in the city. It's easier that way, he argued. Why take them to the village? It's a waste of time and money. But his relations didn't agree. The elders came to the city to see him, his mother's people and the men in his father's compound all stood their ground. Udi is their home, they said. This is where they belong. You can't just decide because you don't like Udi. Their graves are in Udi, their stories are Udi. You are the only son, but not the only child. They stood up and they left in anger. The arguments dragged on for weeks. Emeka fought hard, but they fought harder. In the end, he had no choice but to bring his parents' bodies back to the village. The elders told him he must kill cows for the burial, but he argued, why should I kill cows? 2 goats are enough. They said, the female goat is for the Umwada. And the male goat is for the elders we were insulted. After much argument, he finally brought the 2 cows and 2 goats, 1 male, 1 female, and handed them to the elders. You will see me on the burial day. I don't have any business with you all until that day, he said, walking to his car. I remember the day he arrived. The moment Emeka drove into the compound with his city friends. Men dressed in suits too fine for the dusty roads and shoes that shone like mirrors. You could feel the tension in the air. He was planning to leave the same day, everyone could see that. He barely greeted anyone, kept checking his phone, and whispered to his friends about heading back to the city after the formalities. But the elders had other plans. They looked around at the mud houses, the thatched roofs, and the women cooking with firewood like they had walked into another world. Emeka didn't even greet the elders. He just handed money to someone and started giving orders about where to set up the canopies for the burial. People watched him, whispering, but no one said a word. I saw the way he looked at the old women who sat on low stools, chewing bitter cola. He didn't greet them either. The Umwada approached him and their leader asked him, Emeka, where is your wife and children, or are they not part of this family? His eyes scanned the place like he was counting the ways it was beneath him. He didn't reply them. The burial was noisy and chaotic, as all burials are, but there was something different about this one. People came, but not everyone. Some stayed away, muttering that they had no business with a man who thought himself too big for his people. When the time came to bury his parents, Emeka's relations made him do it their way. The villagers didn't go near him. Emeka stood there stiffly, arms crossed, and looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. The village buried his parents the proper way. After the burial, the women of the family cooked and served food, but Emeka didn't eat. He stayed by his car, talking to his city friends. That was the last straw for the elders. When they told him they wouldn't allow him to leave without respecting his parents and the village, he laughed. You can't stop me, he said. But they did. The anger boiled over. The men grabbed sticks and surrounded him. You forgot us, they said. You forgot the people who made you who you are. People who gave you life. People who made sure you went to school. And they flogged him. When the first stick came down on Emeka's back, his friends scattered like frightened chickens. I was there, watching from the side. One moment, they were standing with him, all confident in their city clothes. The next, they were gone, disappearing down the dusty paths. They focused on Emeka. The men surrounded him, their voices stern. This is for your father, one of them said as the stick landed. This is for your mother, said another. Emeka tried to explain, tried to argue, but they didn't let him. They flogged him until he fell to his knees. After the flogging, the elders didn't let him leave. They ordered the younger men, the ones with strong arms and quick legs, to surround him. Nobody leaves this compound tonight, the head elder said. His sisters ran to him, crying and begging them to stop, but they didn't listen. When it was over, he sat on the ground, bruised and shaking. Emeka sat under the mango tree, clutching his bruised arms. He was too tired to fight, too hurt to speak. By midnight, the elders had gone home, leaving only the young men to watch him. When he finally fell asleep, they let him be. He's learned his lesson, one of them said quietly. The rest is up to him. It was the middle of the night when I saw him and the lantern I carried flickered weakly, throwing shadows across his face. His body was curled up tight like a child hiding from the world, but his eyes, wide open, stared at something only he could see. I didn't know if I should wake him or leave him. This wasn't my business, but the sight of a grown man sleeping there in the open, in his own father's village, was unsettling. The lantern in my hand shook a little as I walked closer. Emeka, I called softly, not sure if he was awake. He didn't answer. Emeka, I said again, louder this time. He blinked and looked at me like he didn't know where he was. What is it? He asked, his voice hoarse. You can't sleep here, I said. Come inside. There's space in my house. He shook his head. I'm fine here. It's not safe, I insisted. What if something happens? He laughed bitterly. What else can happen? I'm already in this place. That's enough. I didn't understand him then, but there was something in his voice that made me stop arguing. I left him there and went back to my house. A stranger in his own land. In the morning, the women who came to sweep the compound found him still under the tree. They said he looked like he hadn't slept, like the weight of the whole world was sitting on his chest. Emeka could barely move. His two sisters came to his side, tears running down their faces. The sisters helped him to his car, one on each side. He winced with every step, but he didn't complain. When they got him into the car, one of the sisters took the driver's seat and drove him back to the city. His sisters tried to console him. Let's take you to your hospital, one of them said. No, he replied, his voice hoarse. I'll treat myself at home. He shouted at them. Leave me alone, he said. His face swollen and his pride shattered. Life has a way of humbling even the proudest among us. A few weeks after the burial, Emeka's hospital in the city was demolished. The government claimed the land it stood on was theirs. Emeka didn't speak to anyone for days. When he finally emerged, he wasn't the same man. Instead of buying land and start rebuilding his hospital in the city, he turned his attention back to the village he had abandoned. It started with a letter to a foreign medical organization. Emeka told them about Udi, about the lack of healthcare, about how far people had to travel for even the simplest treatments. Somehow, he convinced them. A year later, the organization funded the construction of a massive medical center in the heart of Udi. It wasn't just a hospital, it was a complex with modern facilities, doctors' quarters, and even a small school for training local nurses. Emeka didn't stop there. He built a modern duplex for himself and his family. When it was done, he packed up his things in the city and moved back to the village for good. By then, most of the elders who had flogged him were dead and gone. Only two were still alive to see the change. They sat on their low stools under the mango tree, watching as Emeka's children played in the compound. One of them smiled. When the chips are down, he said. The other nodded. They chicken out, he said. And so, Emeka, the man who once turned his back on his village, became its greatest blessing.